I can't believe you changed the locks on our lakehouse for your personal trainer, I said, watching my husband Jason load his expensive mountain bike onto her Jeep. The deed's in my name now. Legally, there's nothing you can do about it. He smirked. I turned away to hide my smile. He had no idea I'd discovered his offshore accounts last month, or that his mistress was actually working for my brother's private investigation firm. The cloudless summer sky seemed to mock the storm, brewing inside me as I stood in the driveway of what was once our dream home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sprawling cedar and glass lake house on Evergreen Point had been our sanctuary for 5 years, a place where we'd planned to retire someday, watching sunsets from the wraparound deck and hosting our future grandchildren. Now, Megan, with her perfect athletic build and highlighted blonde hair, was meticulously arranging Jason's designer luggage in her vehicle, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. "You'll need to be out of the main house by the end of the month," Jason continued, not even looking at me as he secured his carbon fiber bike worth more than some people's cars. "I've been more than generous with the settlement offer. My lawyer will be in touch." 22 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to: clinical destruction delivered without emotion. The practiced detachment in his voice told me this wasn't impulsive. He'd been planning it for months, maybe years. I took a slow sip of my coffee, using the mug to hide the expression that might give me away. The bitter liquid matched my mood, but the knowledge I carried gave me strength. Jason had always been meticulous about appearances but careless with details he deemed unimportant, like the fact that I'd managed our taxes for the past decade, or that I knew every password to every account he'd ever created. "You seem awfully calm about all this," Megan observed, her voice carrying that subtle condescension reserved for women she perceived as older and less relevant. At 34, she was 16 years my junior, a fact Jason thought I obsessed over. What he didn't understand was that age wasn't what bothered me. Betrayal was. "Just processing," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's not every day you watch your husband give away a $3 million property to someone he's known for less than a year." Jason slammed the Jeep's tailgate shut, the sound echoing across the pristine lake. A family of ducks scattered from the shoreline, their peaceful morning disrupted just like my life. "It's not giving away," he corrected, finally turning to face me. His once familiar blue eyes were distant, already looking through me rather than at me. "It's strategic asset reallocation, something you never understood about my business." The condescension in his voice would have cut deeply 6 months ago. Now it was just further confirmation I was making the right choice. I'd spent too many years doubting myself, believing his narrative that my contributions were less valuable because they didn't come with a paycheck or public recognition. "Interesting timing," I noted casually, leaning against the cedar porch railing. "Right after you became the majority stockholder in Biogen. Quite the coincidence." A flicker of something, concern, annoyance, crossed his face before his practiced smile returned. "The divorce settlement is more than fair, Rebecca. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." What Jason didn't know, couldn't know, was that 3 nights ago, I'd sat in my brother Daniel's office reviewing surveillance photos, bank statements, and recorded conversations that told a very different story about my husband's business dealings. Daniel had warned me years ago that Jason wasn't the ethical businessman he portrayed himself to be, but I'd defended him, believing in the man I thought I'd married. "We should get going," Megan interjected, sliding her oversized sunglasses down from her perfect blowout. "We're expected at the marina by noon." She placed a proprietary hand on Jason's arm, diamond tennis bracelet catching the sunlight. The bracelet I'd found the receipt for in Jason's briefcase 2 months ago, the business expense that had finally pushed me to start digging deeper. "Of course," Jason replied, checking his Rolex, a 10th anniversary gift from me. The boat. Won't wait. He turned to me with practiced politeness. Rebecca, Jerry will be in touch about the remaining paperwork. Just sign where he indicates, and this can all be over quickly. Jerry Hoffman, his attorney and golf buddy. The same man who'd drafted the questionable documents transferring our vacation property into Jason's name alone last year. For tax purposes, Jason had explained then, promising it was temporary. I'd signed without questioning, a mistake I wouldn't repeat. I nodded pleasantly, watching them climb into the Jeep. Through the open window, I could hear Megan's laughter, the sound of someone who believed she'd won the ultimate prize. If she only knew what was coming. As the Jeep's taillights disappeared, down the private road, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Daniel. They've left. Eagle's Nest is empty. Within 20 minutes, an unmarked van pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out first, followed by two people carrying equipment. Cases. His expression was grim, but determined. The same look he'd worn during difficult cases throughout his career. Are you absolutely sure about this, Becca? He asked, using my childhood nickname. Once we start, there's no going back. I looked at the lakehouse. The hand-selected river stones in the fireplace, the custom bookshelves I'd designed, the kitchen where I'd hosted countless gatherings while Jason charmed our guests with stories of his business acumen. For years, I'd built our life while he built his empire, never realizing I was just another asset to be managed. I've never been more certain, I replied, handing him the key I'd secretly duplicated. Let's find everything. As Daniel's team began, meticulously documenting the contents of Jason's home office, I walked down to the lake's edge, watching ripples disturb the perfect reflection of mountains on water. Jason had always been obsessed with appearances, with perfection. He'd curated our life like a magazine spread, positioning himself as the brilliant provider and me as the grateful beneficiary of his success. What he'd never understood was that I saw behind the facade, the manipulations, the gradual erosion of my independence, the calculated way he'd isolated me from friends and family who might question his narrative. I'd accepted it all, making excuses, believing somehow I wasn't seeing things clearly, until 3 months ago, when I discovered his plan to divorce me after the Biogen merger was complete. The prenup he'd insisted on, just a formality, would leave me with a fraction of what we'd built together, while the offshore accounts I wasn't supposed to know about would protect the majority of his wealth. I took a deep breath of pine-scented air, feeling the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. Jason thought he held all the cards, that I would crumble in the face of his betrayal. He believed the Rebecca he'd carefully molded over 2 decades, compliant, trusting, dependent, would accept whatever he offered. He had no idea who I really was, or what was coming. Daniel set up his laptop on the kitchen island, the gleaming marble surface reflecting the complex diagrams and documents on the screen. 5 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division before starting his own investigation. Firm had given my brother skills that Jason had severely underestimated when he dismissed him as just another cop. We've traced the money through 7 different shell companies, Daniel explained, pointing to a flowchart that looked like a complex spider web. Your husband has been siphoning funds from Biogen's research subsidiary since he joined the board 3 years ago. I studied the diagram, recognizing some of the company names from tax documents I'd filed away over the years. Jason had always insisted on explaining them as necessary corporate structures while discouraging my questions. What about the Cayman accounts? I asked, sliding a folder across the counter. I found these statements hidden in his golf bag last month. Daniel raised an eyebrow, impressed. You've been busy. He flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. This matches what we found, but having the actual statements with his signature, that's better than we hoped for. His investigator, Layla, looked up from photographing Jason's home office. We've found a hidden safe behind the bookshelf. Standard procedure is to document but not open without court orders. How do you want to handle this? Daniel looked at me questioningly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was the moment where we could still turn back, still pretend this was just an exercise in curiosity rather than the beginning of Jason's downfall. I straightened my shoulders. I know the combination. Walking to the bookshelf, I slid aside. The collected works of Hemingway, books Jason displayed but never read, and revealed the digital keypad. Our wedding date backwards. He's always been predictable that way. The safe swung open to reveal stacks of documents, a passport I'd never seen before, and several USB drives carefully labeled with dates. Daniel whistled low. Jackpot. Is that what I think it is? I asked, pointing to a thick folder marked Biogen merger. If you're thinking it's insider trading evidence, then yes. Daniel carefully photographed each document before touching it. Your husband has been buying shares through proxy companies before each public announcement. The SEC would have a field day with this. What Jason never realized during our marriage was that I'd absorbed everything during those endless corporate dinners where he'd talked business while assuming I was focused on menu selections. I'd caught patterns, recognized names, stored away, comments that seemed innocent at the time but now formed a damning constellation of evidence. There's something else you should see, I said, leading them to the boathouse. The lakeside structure looked modest from the outside, but inside housed Jason's pride and joy, a custom mahogany speedboat worth over $200,000. What most people didn't know was that the boathouse had a small office area where Jason sometimes worked when he claimed to need complete privacy. I lifted the vintage nautical map from the wall, revealing another hidden safe. This one's newer. He installed it last year when the Biogen deal started getting serious. Daniel looked impressed again. How did you? He thinks I don't pay attention, I explained simply. But I've spent 22 years watching him, learning his patterns. Every time he says he wants privacy, I make it my business to know why. This safe required a key rather than a combination. I removed the small brass key from my pocket, the twin to the one Jason kept in his workout bag, thinking I never went near his home gym equipment. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten ledger. Daniel handled them with gloved hands, carefully placing them in evidence bags. Rebecca, he said solemnly, with what we've gathered today, Jason isn't just looking at divorce problems. He's looking at federal charges. The weight of that statement hung in the air. This wasn't just about saving my financial future anymore. It was about exposing crimes that affected shareholders, employees, and possibly patients relying on Biogen's medical research. What about Megan? I asked. How deep is she involved? Layla spoke up, scrolling through files on her tablet. Based on our surveillance, she's not just the mistress. She's been actively helping him move documents and set up meetings with offshore bankers. She introduced herself as his executive assistant at the Grand Cayman Bank last month. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Somehow, I'd been holding on to the idea that she was just a young woman caught up in Jason's manipulations, the way I once had been. The knowledge that she was a willing accomplice hardened my resolve. She's been with him to my brother's firm. At least 4 times, Layla continued, always using fake names. Your husband may have found her at the gym, but her background suggests this isn't her first rodeo. 3 wealthy men in the last decade, all ending with significant gifts before relationships dissolved. A professional mistress, I murmured, pieces clicking into place. The calculated way she'd appeared in our lives, the convenient background as a personal trainer that gave her access to our home, the gradual insertion of herself into Jason's daily routine. More than that, Daniel corrected. Based on these records, she's been helping him move money. That makes her a co-conspirator in financial fraud. As the team continued gathering evidence, I wandered onto the deck overlooking the lake. The afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the water, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the rumble of Jason's boat. He would be out there for hours, showing off for Megan, celebrating what he thought was his perfect escape. Little did he know that while he was drinking champagne on the water, his carefully constructed house of cards was being dismantled piece by piece. The lake house he'd taken from me would become the very thing that destroyed him. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd been the perfect corporate wife. Supportive, unquestioning, always making myself smaller to accommodate Jason's growing ego. I'd believed his gaslighting when he insisted I was overreacting to his late nights or being paranoid about his female colleagues. Now, standing on the deck of what was supposed to be our retirement dream, I finally recognized the strength that had been there all along. I hadn't been blind. I'd been gathering information, storing away inconsistencies, waiting for the moment when all the pieces aligned. Jason had severely underestimated me, and that would be his ultimate downfall. The evening descended on Evergreen Point, painting the lake in shades of amber and gold as I sat on the deck with a glass of Cabernet, Jason's favorite wine from a vineyard in Napa Valley where we'd spent our 15th anniversary. A trip he'd spent mostly on conference calls while I toured the grounds alone. I could hear the distant purr of the boat engine as Jason and Megan returned from their afternoon on the water. Their laughter carried across the still lake surface, carefree and entitled. The sound no longer hurt as it had when I'd first discovered their affair 6 months ago. Instead, it fueled my resolve. Daniel and his team had departed an hour earlier, taking with them enough evidence to build an ironclad case. They'd left behind sophisticated recording equipment and cameras, carefully hidden throughout the property. Every conversation, every boast, every plan Jason and Megan discussed would now be documented. Remember, Daniel had cautioned before leaving, don't confront him. Don't give any indication that you know. We need them comfortable enough to keep talking freely. The boat docked with a gentle thud against the private pier. I watched as Jason helped Megan off the vessel, his hand lingering possessively at her waist. Her sundress clung to her athletic figure, slightly damp from what I assumed was an impromptu swim. My husband's eyes never left her as she gathered their things. I slipped inside before they spotted me, moving to the kitchen where I could observe without being noticed. The lake house's open design, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and spacious great room, had always been perfect for entertaining. Now it served a different purpose, allowing me to track their movements while appearing to be simply preparing dinner. The glass door slid open, and Jason's voice filled the space. Absolutely the right decision. Henderson confirmed the offshore transfer is untraceable. Once the merger announcement hits next week, we'll be set. I busied myself chopping vegetables, keeping my movements relaxed and measured despite my racing heart. This was exactly the kind of conversation Daniel had hoped to capture. Explicit confirmation of financial misconduct. Rebecca, Jason acknowledged, with surprise, noticing me at the counter. I didn't realize you were still here. I looked up with practiced casualness. Just gathering some personal things. I gestured to the vegetables, and making a quick dinner before I head back to the city. Megan had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable, hovering in the doorway as if uncertain whether to enter what had been my kitchen for years. Her discomfort was fleeting, replaced quickly by a territorial confidence as she moved to the refrigerator and helped herself to a bottle of sparkling water. We actually have dinner reservations at the lodge, Jason said dismissively. You should have called ahead. The implication was clear. I was now an unwelcome intruder in my own vacation home. I continued chopping, maintaining the facade of the agreeable wife he expected me to be. Just a quick meal. I'll be gone before you need to leave. Jason checked his watch, my anniversary gift, with impatience. We'll be upstairs changing. The casual cruelty of announcing their shared destination sent a clear message about my replacement. As their footsteps receded up the spiral staircase to the master suite, I allowed myself a small smile. Every word was being recorded, every dismissive interaction documented. The arrogance that led Jason to speak so freely about financial transfers in the open would be his undoing. I finished preparing my simple dinner, a meal for one that I took, out to the deck. The evening had deepened, the lake now a mirror reflecting the first emerging stars. From here, I could see our neighbor Dale Jenkins' dock across the small cove. Dale, a retired judge who had served on the federal bench for 3 decades before stepping down to enjoy his golden years on this peaceful lake. Dale had been a confidant during the past difficult months, offering legal insights without explicitly knowing all the details. His friendship had been one of the few Jason hadn't managed to sabotage over the years. Now I could see him on his deck, raising a glass in my direction, our prearranged signal that everything was in place on his end. Jason and Megan emerged. 45 minutes later, both dressed with the calculated casualness of the wealthy. My husband's loafers alone cost more than most people's entire outfits. Megan wore a simple white dress that I recognized from a boutique in Milan. I'd considered purchasing it myself during our last trip before deciding it was overpriced. Jason had apparently thought it perfect for his mistress. "Don't wait up," Jason said, pausing at the deck door. His tone suggested humor, but his eyes were cold. "Though I suppose you don't anymore, do you?" "Enjoy your evening," I replied, raising my glass slightly. "The lodge has a wonderful new chef, I hear." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He hadn't expected me to know about the restaurant changes. In his mind, I was already disconnected from our shared social world, relegated to the periphery of his existence. As their BMW pulled away down the gravel drive, I sent another text to Daniel. "Eagles flying. Nest is clear." Within 20 minutes, the team returned, this time with additional equipment and a forensic accountant named Marcus, who specialized in tracking hidden assets. The intensity in the lakehouse shifted as they worked with practiced efficiency, downloading data from Jason's home computer, placing additional devices in strategic locations, and creating backup copies of everything they found. "His password was still your anniversary," Marcus noted with a shake of his head as he accessed Jason's desktop. With an exclamation point added. "Not exactly Fort Knox." "He never thought I'd look," I explained, watching as financial records filled the screen. "He constructed our entire relationship around the idea that I trusted him implicitly and didn't understand his world." "Well, his world is about to get much smaller," Marcus murmured, plugging in an external drive. "These transaction records match exactly what we suspected. Classic pump-and-dump scheme with the Biogen subsidiaries, but with a sophisticated twist using the offshore accounts." I moved to the great room windows, looking out at the dark water. Jason and I had purchased this property when the biotech company he worked for was acquired, netting him his first major windfall. We'd spent weekends dreaming about retirement here, designing each room to capture the perfect view. I'd believed then that we were building a future together. "Rebecca," Daniel called softly, interrupting my thoughts. "You need to see this." On his tablet was an email chain between Jason and Megan, dating back 18 months, long before she'd, coincidentally, become his personal trainer. The messages outlined a careful strategy, how she would arrange to meet him, how they would stage their introduction, how she would gradually become indispensable. "This wasn't chance," Daniel said gently. "She targeted him specifically because of the Biogen connection. Her previous companion worked at a competing pharmaceutical company. The revelation should have hurt, but instead, it provided a strange clarity. The calculated nature of their relationship somehow made my own failings less painful. I hadn't missed signs of a genuine connection. I'd been deliberately manipulated by 2 people skilled in deception. "There's more," Marcus added from the computer. "They're planning to leave the country after the merger announcement. One-way tickets to a non-extradition country, booked under aliases but paid for from one of his hidden accounts." I took a deep breath, absorbing this final betrayal. "How soon?" 3 days, Daniel replied, his expression grim. Which means we need to move faster than planned. The following morning, I woke before sunrise, my mind surprisingly clear despite having slept only a few hours. I brewed coffee in the gourmet kitchen that had once been my pride and joy, watching dawn gradually illuminate the mist rising from the lake's surface. Today would set everything in motion. There would be no turning back. Daniel arrived as planned at 7, his expression serious as he spread documents across the dining table. The rich mahogany surface, hand-selected from sustainable forests in the Pacific Northwest, had hosted countless dinner parties where Jason charmed colleagues and investors. Now it served as our war room. The SEC has officially opened an investigation based on the evidence we submitted, Daniel explained, pointing to a confidential case number on one of the documents. They're moving quickly because of the pending merger announcement. Judge Davidson signed off on the warrants last night. Judge Thomas Davidson, a longtime colleague of Dale's, had been carefully selected for his reputation for discretion and his history of ruling against white-collar criminals who use legal loopholes to escape justice. What about our timing issue? I asked, referring to Jason and Megan's planned escape. 3 days wasn't much time for federal investigations to complete their work. That's where you come in, Daniel said, sliding a folder toward me. We need to delay them without raising suspicion, give the authorities time to coordinate across jurisdictions. I opened the folder to find a detailed script, not what I should say verbatim, but conversation points designed to extract additional information while keeping Jason from fleeing. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. I would play the role Jason already expected of me, the desperate soon-to-be ex-wife trying to salvage something from the ruins of our marriage. You want me to beg, I said, understanding immediately. I want you to let him think he's won, Daniel corrected. People like Jason are most vulnerable when they believe they're in complete control. That's when they make mistakes, reveal details. They otherwise wouldn't. I nodded, scanning the suggested approaches. And Megan? Based on her communications, she gets nervous when plans change. If you can create some doubt about the timeline, she might pressure Jason to share more details with her. The recording equipment we've installed will catch everything. The strategy. Session continued for another hour, fine-tuning every aspect of our approach. We were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the deck, Jason emerging for his morning ritual of coffee by the lake, something he'd done every day during our years together. He's alone, I observed, watching through the window as Jason settled into an Adirondack chair, seemingly absorbed in whatever he was reading on his tablet. Megan must still be asleep. Perfect timing, Daniel said, gathering his materials quickly. Remember, just enough emotion to be believable, but not so much that he shuts down. We need him talking. After Daniel slipped out the side door, I waited. 5 minutes, then prepared a second cup of coffee, black with 1 sugar, exactly as Jason had taken it for 22 years. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the deck. Thought you might want a refill, I said, setting the mug on the small table beside him. You always said the coffee tastes better out here. Jason looked up, momentarily startled by my approach. His expression shifted quickly from surprise to wariness. Thanks, he said cautiously, taking the mug but not drinking from it immediately. A small gesture that spoke volumes about his distrust. I sat in the adjacent chair, keeping a deliberate distance. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water. In another lifetime, this would have been a peaceful moment between us. Beautiful morning, I observed, keeping my tone neutral. I've always loved how the light hits the water at this hour. Jason's posture remained tense, but he nodded slightly. What do you want, Rebecca? I thought you were heading back to the city. I need to understand something, I said, allowing a carefully calibrated tremor into my voice. After all these years, I think I deserve at least that. He sighed, the sound heavy with impatience rather than regret. There's nothing to understand. People change. Feelings change. It's not about the relationship, I clarified, though the dismissive way he reduced our 2 decades together to feelings stung despite everything. It's about the timing. Why now? Why the rush to transfer properties and finalize everything so quickly? A flicker of something, concern, annoyance, crossed his face before he controlled his expression. The market's unpredictable. It makes sense to settle matters cleanly and efficiently. I looked out at the lake, choosing my next words carefully. I spoke with Jerry yesterday. This was a calculated risk. Jason's attorney was firmly in his corner, but invoking his name might yield valuable information about their legal strategy. Jason's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around the coffee mug. Did you? He mentioned some concerns about the asset transfers, I continued, building on the fabrication. Something about timing issues with the biogen situation. Jerry wouldn't discuss that with you, Jason replied sharply, then caught himself. There are no issues. Everything's proceeding according to plan. I allowed my gaze to drop, assuming the posture of someone defeated. I'm not fighting you on the divorce, Jason. I just need time to make arrangements. The house in the city, our investments. Suddenly everything's happening so fast. His expression softened slightly. Not from compassion, but from the satisfaction of perceiving my vulnerability. This was the Jason I knew best. Magnanimous in victory, willing to be generous, once he believed resistance was futile. The settlement offer is more than fair, he said, his tone taking on that instructive quality he used when explaining things he believed were beyond my comprehension. You're getting the city house and a comfortable allowance. Most women in your position would be grateful. I swallowed the retort that rose instinctively. Most women in my position hadn't discovered their husbands were committing securities fraud. Most women hadn't spent months gathering evidence while pretending everything was normal. I am grateful, I managed instead. I just need more time before everything finalizes. Maybe we could extend the timeline by a few weeks. After the biogen announcement, perhaps? The mention of biogen caused a subtle shift in his demeanor. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied my face, looking for any indication that I knew more than I should. Why would the biogen announcement matter to our divorce proceedings? He asked carefully. I fabricated a casual shrug. I assumed you'd be busy with the merger. Wouldn't it be easier to handle personal matters after your professional obligations are settled? He seemed to relax marginally, accepting my explanation. Some matters can't wait, he said firmly. The paperwork needs to be finalized by Friday. 2 days before their planned departure. The timeline was tighter than we'd realized. That seems unnecessarily rushed, I ventured, allowing a hint of suspicion into my voice. Unless there's something I should know? Jason set down his mug with a decisive clink. The only thing you need to know is that delaying the inevitable doesn't help either of us. Sign the papers, take the settlement, and move on with your life, Rebecca. I have. The finality in his tone signaled the end of the conversation. He stood gathering his tablet. I have calls starting in 15 minutes. We'll be leaving tomorrow, not Friday as originally planned. The movers will be here next week for my remaining things. As he turned to leave, I made one final attempt. Jason, wait. He paused, looking back with impatience. I found some financial documents in the study that might be important to you, I said. Offshore account statements. I set them aside rather than packing them with my things. The color drained slightly from his face. Where are they? In my car, I lied smoothly. I can bring them in later when you're done with your calls. He hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining his dismissive stance and securing potentially damaging evidence. Leave them on my desk, he finally instructed. And Rebecca? This changes nothing about our arrangements. As he disappeared into the house, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The bait was set. Now we needed to see if he would take it directly to Megan, potentially revealing more of their plans in the process. I texted Daniel. Timeline accelerated. Departure now tomorrow. He took the bait on the documents. His response came immediately. Perfect. Keep playing your role. SEC team arriving tonight? Do not leave property. We need you there when everything happens. The quiet afternoon gave me time to reflect as I packed a few cherished items from what had once been our shared retreat. Each object carried memories. Some I would treasure. Others I was ready to leave behind. The hand-painted pottery from our trip to Greece. The antique compass I'd given Jason on our 5th anniversary, inscribed with, "For the journey ahead." How naive I'd been then, believing we were navigating life together, rather than moving in increasingly divergent directions. Jason remained sequestered in his home office, making calls in that confident, commanding voice that had once made me feel protected rather than controlled. Megan had disappeared for a quick workout, though Daniel's text confirmed she was actually making calls from her car, suddenly worried about their accelerated departure. I found myself drawn to the photo albums I'd meticulously assembled over the years. Jason had always mocked my outdated preference for physical photographs, but I'd persisted, believing some memories deserved more permanence than a digital file. Sitting cross-legged on the guest room floor, I opened the earliest album, our first year together. I met Jason Turner at 32, when I was already established in my career as an architectural designer specializing in sustainable luxury homes. My firm had been commissioned to redesign the headquarters of Helix Pharmaceuticals, where Jason had recently been appointed as Director of Strategic Development. Our first meeting had been contentious. He'd dismissed my initial concepts as too avant-garde for serious business. "I need clients to see stability and tradition when they walk in," he'd insisted, leaning against my drafting table with casual confidence. "Not some experimental eco-statement. And I need to design a building that won't be environmentally obsolete in 10 years, I'd countered, refusing to be intimidated by his Brooks Brothers suit and Ivy League pedigree. The photo captured us at the groundbreaking ceremony 6 months later, the design a perfect synthesis of traditional elegance and forward-thinking sustainability. Jason stood slightly apart from the group, watching me explain the building's features to the company's CEO, his expression thoughtful, reassessing. He'd asked me to dinner that night, ostensibly to discuss the interior specifications. Instead, we'd talked for hours about architecture, his childhood in Boston, my years studying in Barcelona, our shared love of sailing. He listened attentively, asked insightful questions, seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives, a stark contrast to the dismissive executive I'd first encountered. "You surprised me," he admitted over dessert. "I've never been so pleased to be proven wrong about someone." Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend sailing trips on his family's boat. Impromptu flights to Chicago to see a renowned architectural exhibition. Late nights discussing my vision for sustainable luxury design, while he strategized how to position my ideas in the high-end market. He spoke of partnerships, collaboration, mutual growth. "We could be extraordinary together," he said the night he proposed, just 7 months after we met. The ring was his grandmother's, a vintage emerald that he'd had reset in a modern platinum setting. "Traditional values, contemporary execution," he'd explained, sliding it onto my finger. "Just like us." I turned the album page to our wedding photos. The ceremony at his family's estate in Connecticut, old money mixing uncomfortably with my more bohemian circle of friends. My father, a retired literature professor, looking slightly overwhelmed by the opulence. Jason's mother, Catherine, embracing me with practiced warmth that never quite reached her eyes. "Turner men choose exceptional women," she'd told me at the rehearsal dinner, her voice lowered conspiratorially. "But they require management. A subtle hand on the rudder, dear." I hadn't understood her warning then, had dismissed it as the outdated perspective of a woman from another generation. Only years later did I recognize the truth embedded in her words. Not that Turner men needed direction, but that they presented one course while secretly charting another. The early years of our marriage unfolded across the album pages. The ambitious renovation of our brownstone in the city, the acquisition of the lakehouse as a weekend retreat, professional milestones, my first major solo commission for an eco-resort in Costa Rica, Jason's promotion to Chief Strategy Officer at Helix. We were partners then, or so I believed. When I traveled for site visits, Jason would sometimes rearrange his schedule to join me. When he faced challenges at work, we'd strategize together on the deck of our lakehouse, his respect for my insight apparent in how seriously he considered my suggestions. The shift began so gradually I couldn't pinpoint exactly when things changed. A canceled trip here, a dismissed idea there. Subtle criticisms wrapped in concern. Are you sure you want to take on another project when you're already so stressed? Questions that undermined rather than supported. Wouldn't that design be too ambitious for your current team's capabilities? I set aside the first album and opened another, documenting the middle years of our marriage. The photographs showed the external trappings of success, more elaborate vacations, prestigious social events, expanding properties. But looking closely, I could see the transformation in my own expression, the confident spark in my eyes dimming, my posture becoming more deferential to Jason's commanding presence. During our 10th year together, I was offered a prestigious opportunity to lead the design of a groundbreaking sustainable community in Seattle. It would have required significant time on the West Coast during the initial phases, 6 months of frequent travel. It's not practical with our lifestyle, Jason had argued. My position at Helix is at a critical juncture. We need to present a united front. When I'd pressed, pointing out that we could manage the temporary separation and that the project aligned perfectly with my professional goals, his tactics shifted. I've been thinking it might be time to start our family, he said, catching me completely off guard. We'd always discussed children as a theoretical future possibility, never with any concrete timeline. This project would delay that by years. The photos from that period showed a particular strain around my eyes. I'd ultimately declined the Seattle project, telling myself it was a mutual decision about our shared future. 6 months later, when I brought up the family planning discussion again, Jason had sighed, explaining that Helix was in acquisition talks, and the timing wasn't right after all. By our 15th anniversary, the dynamic had shifted completely. Jason had moved from Helix to Biogen, bringing with him industry connections and insider knowledge that propelled him quickly to the executive team. My design work had become increasingly local and less innovative. Practical projects, as Jason called them, that wouldn't interfere with our social obligations or his increasingly demanding schedule. The final album contained sparser documentation of recent years. Fewer genuine moments, more staged photos at corporate functions and charity galas. The last image, taken just 8 months ago, showed us at the Biogen holiday party. Jason commanding the room as always, my smile practiced and hollow as I stood, slightly behind him in an expensive dress I'd chosen primarily for his approval. 2 weeks after that photo was taken, I found the first evidence of his affair with Megan, a text message that appeared on his connected iPad while he was showering. A simple "missing you already" that detonated my world. I closed the album, suddenly clear-eyed about the progression of our relationship. Jason hadn't changed. He had simply stopped pretending. The considerate, collaborative man I married had been a carefully crafted persona, designed to acquire what he wanted: my design sensibilities, my social connections in the sustainable architecture world, my unwavering support as he climbed the corporate ladder. Once I was securely installed as the perfect corporate wife, the pretense became unnecessary. The real Jason, calculating, self-serving, controlling, emerged gradually, conditioning me to accept each small erosion of our partnership until I could hardly recognize what we'd become. I'd been mourning a relationship that never truly existed. The realization wasn't painful anymore. It was freeing. The sound of Jason's office door opening pulled me from my reflection. His footsteps approached the guest room, and I quickly returned the albums to the shelf, not wanting him to witness this moment of clarity. "Rebecca," he called, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd perfected over years in boardrooms. "Those documents you mentioned, I need them now." "I'll get them for you," I called back, deliberately keeping my voice neutral as I heard Jason's impatient footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the doorway, his expression a carefully composed mask of professional disinterest that didn't quite hide the tension around his eyes. "Where are they?" he asked, scanning the room as if the documents might be visible among my partially packed belongings. "In my car, as I mentioned," I replied, maintaining the fiction. "Give me a moment to fetch them." Outside, the afternoon had turned cloudy, the lake's surface now a steely gray that matched Jason's mood. I took my time walking to the car, using these precious minutes to compose myself. Daniel had prepared the counterfeit documents, accurate copies of what we'd already submitted to the SEC, but with several key details altered to make Jason believe the evidence was incomplete. A strategic misdirection. I retrieved the manila envelope from the trunk, where it had been waiting for precisely this moment. As I turned to walk back to the house, I glimpsed Megan's Jeep returning down the long driveway, her blonde hair visible through the windshield. Perfect timing. Jason was waiting in the great room, trying to appear casual as he stood by the windows overlooking the lake. I handed him the envelope without comment, watching as he immediately opened it and began scanning the contents. His shoulders relaxed fractionally as he flipped through the pages. Exactly the reaction Daniel had predicted. He believed he was recovering damaging evidence rather than receiving carefully crafted bait. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his tone deceptively conversational. "In the filing cabinet in your study," I said. "When I was looking for our tax returns from last year. I wasn't snooping," I added, playing my role perfectly. "I just thought they looked important." "Did you show these to anyone?" His voice remained level, but I caught the subtle tightening of his jaw, a tell he'd had for years when anxious. "Of course not," I replied, allowing a hint of hurt to color my tone. "Despite everything, I wouldn't deliberately damage your career, Jason." The glass door slid open as Megan entered, her workout clothes immaculate despite her supposed exercise session. She paused, reading the tension in the room. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, her eyes darting to the papers in Jason's hands. "Not at all," he responded smoothly, sliding the documents back into the envelope. "Rebecca was just returning some work files she found." Megan's perfectly shaped eyebrow rose slightly. "Work files? Here at the lakehouse?" The subtle challenge in her voice was interesting, a small crack in their united front. Jason shot her a warning glance, which she acknowledged with a nearly imperceptible nod before heading toward the kitchen. "Is there anything else?" Jason asked me, clearly eager to end our interaction. "Actually," I said, "I was hoping we could discuss the artwork. Some of the pieces were gifts from my parents, and I—" "Take whatever has sentimental value," he interrupted dismissively. "The valuable pieces stay. We can have them appraised and factor their worth into the settlement." His definition of valuable was purely monetary, I knew. The original Plea print that his mother had gifted us would stay regardless of my attachment to it, while the student works I'd collected from promising young artists would be dismissed, as worthless despite their personal significance. This had been our pattern for years. My values systematically devalued, my perspectives dismissed as sentimental or impractical. The control had been incremental, each small concession setting the stage for the next larger one. I thought back to our 3rd year of marriage, when I'd been offered a teaching position at the architectural school where I'd studied. One evening a week, sharing my knowledge with the next generation of sustainable designers, it had seemed perfect. "It doesn't make financial sense," Jason had argued over dinner at an expensive restaurant where I couldn't properly express my disappointment without causing a scene. The time commitment versus compensation is clearly impractical. It's not about the money, I'd tried to explain. It's about giving back, staying connected to emerging ideas in the field. He'd reached across the table, covering my hand with his in a gesture that appeared loving but effectively silenced further discussion. Your dedication is admirable, Becca, but your primary value is in high-end residential design, not academia. Trust me on this, I understand market positioning better than most. I'd withdrawn my application the next day, telling myself Jason was looking out for my best interests, that his business acumen gave him insights I should trust. Only later did I realize the teaching position would have connected me with independent thinkers outside his social circle, people who might have helped me recognize the subtle isolation he was creating. Fine, I agreed now, returning to the present. I'll mark the pieces I'd like to keep. Jason nodded, already turning his attention to his phone as if I'd been dismissed. I noticed Megan watching our interaction from the kitchen, her expression calculating. She whispered something to Jason as I moved toward the stairs, and I caught his sharp response. Not now. Interesting. The pressure of their accelerated timeline was creating tension between them, exactly what we needed. In the upstairs hallway, I paused by what had once been my home office. Early in our marriage, it had been a true creative space, drafting table positioned to capture the northern light, walls covered with inspiration boards and project timelines. Jason had encouraged my work then, proud to tell people at parties that his wife was the innovative force behind several award-winning sustainable home designs. The decline began around our 7th year together, when Jason's position at Helix had solidified and my professional reputation was established enough to benefit his corporate image. He'd begun questioning my project choices, suggesting I focus on prestige clients, rather than the innovative but less lucrative sustainable community developments that truly inspired me. You're underselling yourself, he insisted. With your talent, you should be designing for billionaires, not eco-communities with limited budgets. What he meant, I later realized, was that my work should enhance our social status rather than satisfy my professional ethics. When I resisted, the undermining became more direct. Scheduling conflicts with important client meetings, subtle criticisms of my design concepts when we entertained potential clients at home, questions about my energy level and stress management when I tackled ambitious projects. By our 10th anniversary, my active client list had shrunk to a handful of wealthy individuals approved by Jason. My workspace gradually transformed into a home office used primarily for managing our social calendar and charitable commitments. The drafting table was replaced by an elegant desk that matched the lakehouse decor. The inspiration boards gave way to framed awards and society photos. My professional identity had been so gradually dismantled that I hardly noticed its disappearance until it was gone. I entered the room now, running my fingers along the edge of the desk where I'd spent countless hours coordinating events that advanced Jason's career while my own languished. The realization that I had been complicit in my own professional diminishment was painful but necessary. Each compromise, each deferred dream, each acquiescence to his better judgment had been a step in the gradual erosion of my independence. What had once been love had transformed into something more insidious, a carefully constructed cage of financial dependence and eroded self-confidence. Like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water, I hadn't noticed the danger until I was nearly cooked. The sound of raised voices from downstairs broke through my reflection. Jason and Megan, in a heated discussion they thought was private. I moved quietly to the railing, where the lakehouse's open design allowed their words to drift upward clearly. Can't just change everything overnight without explanation, Megan was saying, her voice tense. It's handled, Jason responded firmly. The documents are recovered, the timeline adjusted. We leave tomorrow as planned. And what about the transfer confirmation? Henderson said. Henderson talks too much, Jason cut her off. The offshore account is secure and the transfers are untraceable. Everything is proceeding according to plan. Their voices lowered again, but I'd heard enough. They were moving forward with their escape plan, confident that all evidence had been contained. Little did they know that everything, including this very conversation, was being recorded and transmitted to Daniel's team and the SEC investigators. The trap was set. Now, we just needed them to step into it completely. The evening descended on the lakehouse with a spectacular sunset, the kind that had once inspired Jason and me to build here, vivid streaks of orange and purple reflecting on the water's surface, silhouetting the pine trees on the opposite shore. I'd taken dinner on the small private balcony off the guest room, wanting distance from the intimate scene Jason and Megan had created in the kitchen below. They cooked together, moving around the space with the easy familiarity of a long-established couple rather than an affair of less than a year. Their laughter drifted upward, punctuated by the clink of wine glasses and the soft music Jason had selected, jazz standards that he knew I'd never particularly enjoyed. The domestic tableau was clearly meant to hurt me if I witnessed it, but instead, it provided an opportunity to observe them unguarded. After they retreated to the master bedroom, I waited 30 minutes before making my move. The lakehouse had fallen silent except for the distant call of nightbirds and the gentle lapping of water against the dock. I moved quietly down the stairs, avoiding the third step that had always creaked despite multiple repair attempts. Jason's laptop sat closed on the kitchen island where he'd left it while cooking. Careless, unlike him, but consistent with his pattern of growing overconfidence. Beside it lay his phone, still plugged into the charger. Another mistake. The Jason I knew never left his devices unattended, always carrying them even between rooms in our own home. I didn't need to access either device. Daniel's team had already implemented sophisticated monitoring software during their earlier visit, but their placement confirmed what we'd suspected. Jason believed the threat was contained. He thought the recovered documents represented the extent of my knowledge, that I remained the oblivious wife he'd so carefully cultivated. I moved to his home office, ostensibly to mark the artwork I wanted to keep as we'd discussed earlier. The real purpose was to check whether our surveillance equipment remained undiscovered. Everything appeared untouched, the tiny camera hidden in the bookshelf still blinking its nearly invisible green light at regular intervals. As I examined the artwork, making a show of placing small adhesive dots on the frames I wished to claim, a notification sound came from Jason's computer, distinctive enough that I recognized it wasn't his usual email alert. Something else. Curiosity drew me to his desk. The monitor had awakened from sleep mode, displaying a secure messaging platform I'd never seen before. A notification bubble showed a new message from someone identified only as Henderson. The preview text was visible. Confirmation received. Bailey's property ready for... The screen went dark before I could read more, the automatic sleep function engaging again. But those few words confirmed another piece of our puzzle. Belize, a country with limited extradition agreements with the United States. The vacation Jason and Megan were planning wasn't temporary. I continued my task of marking artwork, my mind racing as I processed this new information. I needed to alert Daniel without using my phone, which Jason might be monitoring. Moving to the kitchen under the pretense of getting water, I activated the silent alarm feature Daniel had installed. 3 quick taps on an innocent-looking decorative magnet on the refrigerator. Within seconds, my own phone vibrated with what would appear to be a spam notification to anyone monitoring. Daniel's acknowledgement. Message received. I was about to return upstairs when a folder on the edge of Jason's desk caught my attention. It was partially concealed beneath a stack of magazines, its tab unmarked, unusual for someone as meticulously organized as my husband. Something about its deliberate obscurity made me pause. Careful not to disturb the precise arrangement of items on the desk, I eased the folder out just enough to peek inside. The contents made my blood run cold. The folder contained detailed information about me, Not just financial records or divorce papers, but surveillance reports. Photographs of me meeting with my brother Daniel at a cafe 3 weeks ago. Notes about my movements. Phone records. Even a psychological profile that described me as conflict avoidant and financially naive. Assessments that would have been accurate months ago, but were now dangerously outdated from Jason's perspective. Most disturbing was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the back page. RC solution if necessary. Contact through Henderson only. Cash payment as discussed. RC, removal contingency. The clinical euphemism sent a chill through me despite the warm evening. This wasn't just about divorce or financial fraud anymore. Jason had considered, perhaps even arranged, a contingency plan that involved my removal. I carefully returned the folder to its original position, fighting to keep my hands steady. This discovery transformed everything. The careful game were playing wasn't just about justice or financial restitution anymore. It was potentially about my survival. Back in the guest room, I sent Daniel a prearranged text that would appear innocuous to anyone monitoring. Thinking of donating those winter clothes we discussed? When is the charity drive? The coded message would tell him we needed to accelerate our timeline. The stakes had just become life and death. His response came quickly. This weekend, I'll pick everything up tomorrow morning at 8. Translation. They were moving up the operation to tomorrow morning. No more waiting. The SEC and FBI would arrive at 8 a.m., not the following day as originally planned. Sleep was impossible after that discovery. I lay awake replaying moments from our marriage, examining them in this new, terrible light. Had Jason always been capable of such calculation, such coldness? When had I transformed in his mind from partner to possession to obstacle? I thought back to our 15th anniversary, just 2 years ago. We'd taken a sailing trip along the Croatian coast, Jason's choice. Though presented as a gift to me, I'd been thrilled initially, interpreting it as a romantic gesture reminiscent of our early years together. The reality had been different. Jason spent most days on business calls despite promises to disconnect. Evenings that should have been intimate were filled with social engagements with European business associates who, coincidentally, were vacationing in the same areas. What I'd perceived as a second honeymoon had actually been a business development trip with me as the appropriate accessory. One night, after too much wine and accumulated disappointment, I'd confronted him. "This isn't what you promised," I'd said, gesturing to the business documents spread across our cabin's small dining table. "We haven't had a single day that wasn't interrupted by work." His response had been revealing. "Don't be childish, Rebecca. This trip cost over $30,000. Did you really think it was just for playing tourist and holding hands on the beach?" The mask had slipped in that moment, showing the transactional way he viewed our relationship. Everything, even what should have been a celebration of our marriage, was ultimately about business advancement, financial gain, strategic positioning. It was during that trip that Jason had first mentioned meeting with pharmaceutical representatives from Biogen about potential opportunities. 6 months later, he'd made the move from Helix, bringing with him proprietary information that I now understood was at the center of the SEC investigation. Looking back, I could see how dramatically our power dynamic had shifted after that vacation. Jason stopped pretending to consider my input on major decisions. My financial independence, already compromised, was further restricted through a series of simplifications to our accounts that ultimately left me with limited access to our assets. When I'd expressed interest in restarting my design practice, he'd been dismissive in a way that masqueraded as concern. "The industry has changed dramatically while you've been focusing on our home life," he'd explained with practiced patience. "The learning curve would be extremely steep at this point. Why not enjoy the lifestyle we've built instead of starting over?" The calculated erosion of my confidence, my independence, and ultimately my safety had been so gradual I hadn't recognized it for what it was. Like the legendary frog in slowly heating water, I hadn't jumped out because the danger increased, too incrementally to trigger alarm, until now. The folder on Jason's desk was the unmistakable confirmation that he wasn't just leaving me. He was prepared to ensure I couldn't interfere with his plans, by any means necessary. Dawn was breaking over the lake when I finally rose from bed, exhausted but resolute. In less than 3 hours, everything would change. Jason and Megan believed they were hours away from escaping with millions in stolen funds to a new life beyond the reach of U.S. authorities. Instead, they were about to lose everything, including their freedom. I dressed carefully in clothes that projected calm confidence rather than the anxiety churning beneath my surface. Today would require the performance of a lifetime. For just a few more hours, I needed to be the Rebecca that Jason expected, resigned, compliant, oblivious. The sound of movement from the master bedroom indicated that Jason and Megan were awake. Soon they would begin their final preparations, believing this was their last morning in the country. Little did they know it was actually their last morning of freedom. I took a deep breath and prepared to face them one last time as the woman Jason thought I was, rather than the woman I had become. The kitchen was already occupied when I descended the stairs. Megan stood at the gleaming espresso machine, my anniversary gift to Jason 3 years ago, preparing coffee with the confidence of someone who considered the space her own. She wore one of Jason's dress shirts, the expensive Oxford blue cotton, falling mid-thigh over her tanned legs, a deliberate display of intimacy and ownership. "Good morning," I said neutrally, moving to the refrigerator to retrieve orange juice. She glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she recovered her composure. "Morning. I didn't realize you were still here. Jason said you'd be leaving last night." "Change of plans," I replied, pouring myself a glass. "A few more things to sort through before I go." The air between us crackled with unspoken tension. This woman had been in my husband's life for nearly a year, sleeping in my bed, using my things, all while plotting to help him escape justice with millions in stolen funds. Yet in this moment, she seemed almost ordinary, a young woman making coffee, uncertain how to navigate an awkward situation. "Jason's on a call," she offered after a moment, gesturing vaguely toward the office. "Some last-minute work thing." Last minute. Indeed, I thought. Final preparations for their escape, no doubt, unaware that federal agents were already positioning themselves around the property, waiting for Daniel's signal. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. 45 minutes until everything would change. "I'll be out of your way soon," I said, deciding to push slightly. "I'm sure you're eager to have the place to yourselves." Something like guilt flashed across her face. "Look, I know this isn't ideal," she began, her voice lower. "But you should know Jason was unhappy for a long time before me." The standard justification of the other woman. I might have believed it months ago, might have internalized it as another failure on my part. Now I recognized it for what it was. A self-serving narrative that conveniently absolved her of responsibility. Was he? I asked mildly. Strange that his unhappiness coincided so perfectly with his financial schemes. Her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," I replied, letting her see just enough suspicion to plant a seed of doubt. "Just an observation." Before she could respond, Jason emerged from his office, his expression shifting from preoccupation to wariness when he saw us together. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, his tone falsely light. "Perfect," I replied. "Megan was just telling me how unhappy you've been." "In our marriage," I clarified, watching his reaction carefully. His eyes narrowed slightly, darting to Megan before returning to me. "I think we've covered that ground already," he said dismissively. "The separation agreement spells everything out. Of course, I agreed, maintaining my calm demeanor while noting the tactical shift in his language. No longer divorce, but separation. A subtle distinction that might give him more financial flexibility during their planned absence. Jason poured himself coffee, checking his watch with poorly disguised impatience. 7:25 a.m., their planned departure was clearly imminent. "I'll be out of your way shortly," I said, moving toward the stairs. "Just need to collect the last of my things." "Actually," Jason called after me, "I need to speak with you about those documents you returned. In private," he added with a meaningful glance at Megan, who frowned but took her coffee to the deck without protest. In his office, Jason closed the door. The first truly private conversation we'd had in months. His posture was tense, defensive. "Those offshore accounts," he began without preamble. "Did you make copies of those documents before returning them to me?" "No," I lied smoothly. "As I said, I just came across them while looking for tax information." He studied my face, searching for deception. Once, his scrutiny would have made me nervous, caused me to doubt myself. Now, I met his gaze steadily, projecting only the mild confusion of someone who doesn't fully understand the significance of what they've found. "Good," he said finally, "because some of those documents could be misinterpreted without proper context." "I'm sure," I replied noncommittally. "Financial matters can be complicated." His tension eased slightly, taking my response as confirmation of my continued ignorance. This was the dynamic he understood. Jason, the sophisticated financial expert. Rebecca, the supportive but ultimately uninformed wife. "We're leaving this morning," he said, changing tactics. "Earlier than expected. Some business opportunity that can't wait." "I see," I said, allowing a trace of hurt to color my tone. "So soon?" "The movers will handle everything else," he continued, ignoring my question. "Jerry will contact you next week about finalizing the separation agreement." I nodded, playing my part. "All right." He seemed almost disappointed by my lack of resistance, perhaps having prepared for a confrontation that would justify his harsh departure. The Jason I'd married had always functioned best with an opponent, someone to outsmart, outmaneuver, defeat. My apparent surrender denied him that satisfaction. "Is there anything else?" I asked after a moment of silence. He hesitated, and for a brief instant, I glimpsed something like uncertainty in his expression. "Be practical about the settlement, Rebecca," he said finally. "Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. The offer on the table is more than fair given the circumstances. The circumstances." Such a clinical way to describe the decimation of 22 years together. In that moment, standing in the office where he'd plotted financial crimes and potentially arranged my removal, I made a conscious choice. The last vestiges of the woman who had loved this man, who had built a life around his needs and desires, fell away completely. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The carefully maintained physique, the expensive haircut, the practiced confidence in his stance. The visible trappings of success that had once impressed me now seemed like costume pieces, props in the performance of Jason Turner, business visionary. "I'll consider all my options," I said carefully, watching his expression harden at what he perceived as potential defiance. "Don't make this difficult," he warned, his tone carrying a subtle threat that sent a chill through me despite my preparation. "Some situations can get complicated when emotions take over." The veiled menace in his words confirmed everything the folder had suggested. This man, who had once vowed to love and protect me, had contingency plans that included my permanent silence. I checked my watch, 7:40 a.m. 20 minutes until the authorities arrived. "I should finish packing," I said, moving toward the door. "You probably have preparations of your own to complete." He nodded, already turning his attention back to his laptop, dismissing me from his thoughts as he had countless times over the years. But this time, rather than feeling diminished by his indifference, I felt liberated. In the guest room, I quickly gathered my essential belongings, the few items I'd determined were truly important to take with me today. Everything else could be sorted later, after Jason and Megan were in custody. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. In position, 20 minutes. Stay inside until signal. Through the window, I could see Megan on the deck, talking intently on her phone, gesturing with uncharacteristic agitation. Perhaps their accelerated timeline was causing complications with their escape plan. Good. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was about to happen. In 20 minutes, federal agents would enter this house. My husband of 22 years would be arrested for financial crimes that could send him to prison for decades. The life I had known, compromised and controlled as it had been, would be irrevocably altered. Yet alongside the inevitable anxiety was something unexpected, a profound sense of clarity. For months, I'd been gathering evidence, working with Daniel, preparing for this moment, all while maintaining the facade of the agreeable, oblivious wife. The constant performance had been exhausting, but necessary. Now, on the threshold of action, I felt a surprising calm. The decision had been made not in haste or vengeance, but with clear-eyed recognition of who Jason truly was and what he had done, not just to me, but to countless investors, to his colleagues, to the integrity of the financial system itself. This wasn't merely personal justice, it was the right thing to do. The woman who had once subordinated her needs and desires to Jason's preferences had finally found her compass again, oriented not toward pleasing him, but toward truth. I heard movement downstairs, suitcases being brought to the door, murmured. Conversations between Jason and Megan. Their preparations for escape were nearly complete. They believed themselves hours away from freedom, from a new life built on stolen money and discarded obligations. My phone vibrated again. 10 minutes. Positions confirmed. Exit to lake deck on signal. I took a deep breath, gathering the strength for what would come next. 22 years of marriage were about to end, not with quiet separation papers, but with federal agents and criminal charges. I didn't regret my decision. The path forward was clear, even if uncertain. For the first time in years, I was choosing my own direction rather than following Jason's carefully plotted course. It was time to reclaim my life, whatever that might now become. The next 10 minutes stretched like hours. Through the window, I watched as Jason loaded the remaining luggage into Megan's Jeep. They moved with practiced efficiency, their body language betraying neither guilt nor anxiety, just the focused determination of people executing a well-rehearsed plan. They believed themselves to be the architects of a perfect escape, unaware they were actually arranging the final pieces of their own downfall. Daniel's final text arrived precisely on schedule. Now, lake deck as discussed. I took a steadying breath and picked up my small overnight bag. This was it, the culmination of months of careful planning, evidence gathering, and strategic patience. Everything that happened in the next few minutes would determine not just Jason and Megan's fate, but the structure of my life moving forward. As I descended the stairs, I could hear them in the kitchen, speaking in low, urgent tones. Just, strange that Henderson hasn't confirmed the final transfer, Megan was saying, a note of worry in her voice. He will, Jason replied with the absolute confidence that had characterized our entire marriage. Stop creating problems where none exist. I paused, deliberately making enough noise on the last step to alert them to my presence. Their conversation ceased immediately, both turning toward me with nearly identical expressions of impatience. I'm heading out, I announced, keeping my tone casual. Thought I'd say goodbye. Jason's relief was palpable, though he tried to hide it behind a businesslike nod. Jerry will be in touch next week, he repeated, already turning away, clearly considering our interaction complete. Actually, I said, moving toward the deck doors rather than the front entrance, I thought I'd sit by the lake one last time. Before leaving. For closure, I added, seeing his frown of annoyance. We're on a tight schedule, he began, but I was already sliding the glass door open. It'll just take a minute, I called over my shoulder, stepping onto the expansive cedar deck that overlooked the water. Some memories are worth preserving, don't you think? I moved to the railing, gazing out at the lake that had been my sanctuary during the difficult months of discovery and planning. The water was perfectly still this morning, reflecting the surrounding pines and distant mountains like a mirror. Beautiful, tranquil, and completely at odds with the storm about to break. Behind me, I heard the glass door slide open again. Jason's footsteps, heavier than Megan's, approached. "Rebecca," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone of controlled impatience he reserved for what he considered unreasonable behavior. "This isn't the time for—" His words cut off abruptly as the first black SUV emerged from the tree line at the far end of the property. Then another, and another. Within seconds, 5 vehicles had appeared, converging on the lake house from different directions with coordinated precision. "What the hell?" Jason muttered, moving to stand beside me at the railing. "Who are—" The realization hit him just as the first agents exited their vehicles. Their jackets emblazoned with the unmistakable letters, FBI and SEC. Jason whipped toward me, his face transforming with shock and fury. "What have you done?" he hissed, grabbing my arm with bruising force. I met his gaze steadily, no longer pretending to be the compliant wife he believed he'd cultivated. "I read the fine print," I replied calmly, echoing the words from the folder I'd discovered. "All of it, including your RC solution." His eyes widened with genuine fear now, the first time I'd ever seen that emotion on his face. His grip on my arm tightened painfully, but I didn't flinch. "You have no idea what you've done," he growled, his voice barely audible over the approaching footsteps of federal agents. "No idea what I'm capable of." "Actually," I countered, "I know exactly what you're capable of. That's why we're here." The glass door slid open again as Megan rushed onto the deck, her face pale. "Jason, there are federal agents everywhere. What's happening?" Before he could respond, Daniel emerged from around the side of the house, accompanied by 2 agents in tactical gear. My brother's expression was professional, composed, but I caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes as he took in the scene. "Jason, Turner?" he called formally. "FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy." Jason's grip on my arm loosened as the reality of his situation began to sink in. His gaze darted toward the lake, calculating, as always, looking for an escape route. But the agents had positioned themselves strategically, covering all possible exits. "There must be some mistake," he tried, his voice regaining its smooth confidence. "I'm happy to clear up any misunderstanding, but my wife and I are actually in the middle of a separation, and she's been quite emotional about the process. Whatever. She's told you—" "This investigation," Daniel interrupted crisply, "is based on extensive financial evidence, Mr. Turner. Your wife's cooperation was helpful, but not the foundation of our case." Megan had backed away from Jason, her self-preservation instincts clearly kicking in. "I don't know anything about his business dealings," she insisted, directing her words to Daniel. "We're just friends." The betrayal was so immediate, so complete, that under other circumstances I might have felt a flicker of sympathy for Jason. After all, I knew exactly how it felt to have someone you trusted turn against you without warning. 2 agents approached Jason with handcuffs while others entered the house, presumably to secure evidence and prevent the destruction of documents. The practiced ease with which they took control of the situation spoke to careful preparation, weeks of planning culminating in this precise moment. "Rebecca," Jason said, his voice dropping to an urgent murmur as the agents neared, "you need to listen to me. This is all a misunderstanding that can be cleared up. But once they take me in, things will get complicated. You need to call Jerry. Immediately. Tell him to access the Cayman account and— Ms. Morgan, Daniel called over him. We'll need you to come with us as well. We have questions about your role in the transfer of funds through Grand Cayman Bank last month. Megan's composure shattered completely. I was just following instructions, she protested, pointing at Jason. He said it was all legitimate tax planning. I didn't know it was illegal. The look Jason gave her contained such naked hatred that I instinctively stepped back. This was a side of him I'd glimpsed only in rare, unguarded moments throughout our marriage, the cold, calculating core beneath the charming exterior. As the agents recited Miranda rights and secured handcuffs, reality seemed to finally penetrate Jason's confidence. His shoulders sagged slightly, his expression shifting from outrage to something more calculating. He was already strategizing his next move, I realized. Even in handcuffs, Jason Turner was assessing angles, weighing options, planning his counterattack. You've made a catastrophic mistake, he told me quietly as the agents prepared to lead him away. Everything we built, gone. Was it worth it? I considered his question seriously, looking around at the beautiful lake house that had once represented our shared dream and had transformed into a gilded cage, the property he had transferred into his name alone, the home where he had plotted financial crimes and considered arrangements for my removal. Yes, I answered honestly. It was worth it. As they led Jason and Megan toward separate vehicles, I remained on the deck, watching the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. 22 years of marriage ending not with papers signed across a lawyer's desk, but with federal agents and criminal charges. Daniel approached after Jason and Megan were secured in separate SUVs. You did well, he said, professional demeanor, softening slightly. The recording equipment captured everything this morning, including his grab of your arm and veiled threat. That will be useful if he tries to paint you as the vindictive spouse. I nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the performance was over. What happens next? They'll be processed and charged, he explained. Initial appearance before a judge, bail hearing, though with the flight risk and the evidence we have, bail is unlikely for either of them. The prosecutor wants to speak with you this afternoon to go over your witness statement. And the house? I asked, looking at the lake house that had been both dream and prison. The asset freeze covers all properties, Daniel confirmed. Given the fraudulent nature of the transfer into his name, your claim as the innocent spouse should be straightforward. The legal team believes you'll ultimately retain both properties and should be shielded from any clawbacks related to the fraud. It felt surreal, discussing legal strategies on the deck where Jason and I had once planned our retirement, watching federal agents catalog evidence in a home that had been my pride and my prison. You should pack whatever you need for the next few days, Daniel advised gently. The property will be sealed as part of the investigation. I looked out at the lake one last time, the water now disturbed by the activities around the property, ripples breaking the perfect reflection. Like my life, the smooth surface permanently altered, the familiar patterns disrupted, but somehow more real in its imperfection. I have everything I need, I said, lifting my overnight bag. The essential items I'd carefully selected, family photos, my grandmother's jewelry, the journals I'd kept throughout our marriage that would now serve as evidence, and perhaps someday, help me make sense of how I'd become so lost within my own life. As we walked toward Daniel's car, I felt a weight lifting, not just the immediate fear of Jason's contingency plans, but the cumulative burden of years spent diminishing myself to accommodate his ego, his ambitions, his narrative. Each step away from the lake house was a step toward reclaiming my identity. The path ahead was uncertain. There would be legal battles, financial complications, the public exposure of a high-profile fraud case. But for the first time in years, I was walking a path I had chosen, eyes open to both its challenges and possibilities. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of legal meetings, formal statements, and news reports that transformed my private trauma into public spectacle. I stayed in Daniel's guest room, grateful for the sanctuary away from prying eyes and reporters who had quickly connected Jason's arrest to the pending Biogen merger, sending the company's stock into free fall. Andrea Bennett, the lead prosecutor, assigned to the case, met with me in her office overlooking the federal courthouse, a space that radiated competence and quiet authority, much like Andrea herself. In her early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that missed nothing, she had specialized in financial crimes for over 2 decades. The evidence is substantial, she explained, reviewing documents spread across her desk. But cases like this are never simple. Turner has already retained Blackwell and Hayes. The prestigious law firm was known for defending white-collar criminals with seemingly unlimited resources. I wasn't surprised. Jason would spare no expense to protect himself. What does that mean for the case? I asked. It means they'll fight every charge, challenge every piece of evidence, and attempt to paint you as the vindictive spouse who orchestrated a setup. Her directness was refreshing after months of deception. Are you prepared for that? I considered her question carefully. I spent 22 years married to a man who systematically undermined my confidence while presenting himself as my greatest advocate. I can handle whatever his lawyers throw at me. Andrea studied me for a moment, then nodded with something like respect. Good, because I need you to understand something important. This case isn't just about Jason Turner's fraud or your divorce. The Biogen investigation connects to 3 other pharmaceutical companies and potentially hundreds of millions in investor losses. The scope was larger than I had imagined. What I had discovered as personal betrayal had opened the door to a massive financial conspiracy. We've been tracking suspicious activities at Biogen for months, Andrea continued, but couldn't get enough evidence for warrants. Your cooperation broke the case wide open. As she outlined the broader investigation, I realized I was no longer just a wronged spouse seeking justice, but a key witness in what might become one of the largest pharmaceutical fraud cases in recent history. The responsibility was sobering. Turner's legal team will offer a deal, Andrea warned. They'll approach you through your divorce attorney, suggest that dropping your cooperation with our investigation could result in a more favorable settlement. I won't be bought off, I assured her. They'll be persuasive, she cautioned. And they'll use everything they know about you, your financial concerns, your emotional vulnerabilities, to pressure you. Then I'll need to be stronger than they expect, I replied. Andrea's smile was thin but genuine. That's exactly what I'm counting on. As I left the federal building, I found an unexpected figure waiting beside Daniel's car. Dale Jenkins, our neighbor from the lake, the retired federal judge whose friendship had been one of the few Jason hadn't managed to poison. Dale, I greeted, him with surprise. What are you doing here? Supporting a friend, he said simply, his weathered face creased with concern. How are you holding up? The simple kindness nearly undid me after days of clinical legal discussions. Managing, I replied, my voice rougher than intended. Dale nodded, understanding in his eyes. Rebecca, there's something I should have told you months ago. I suspected Jason was involved in something questionable when I noticed unusual boat traffic at your dock during weekdays, meetings on the water where no one could easily observe or record conversations. My surprise must have shown on my face. Old habits, he explained with a slight shrug. 30 years on the federal bench. Teaches you to notice patterns. I should have said something sooner. You had no obligation. Perhaps not legally, he interrupted gently. But as a friend and neighbor, I might have spared you some of this ordeal. He hesitated, then continued. I'd like to help now, if you'll allow it. I still have connections in the judicial community. Nothing improper, he added quickly, but information about which judges might be assigned to the case, insights into how certain arguments might be received. I recognized the value of what he was offering, not just practical assistance, but Another ally in what would likely be a grueling legal battle. I would appreciate that very much. Good, he said with evident relief. And Rebecca, you should know, there are others who want to help. Jason made enemies as well as victims over the years. As if on cue, my phone chimed with a message from Diane Matthews, my former best friend whom Jason had systematically removed from my life years ago with claims of her jealousy and negativity. She had reached out immediately after the news broke. Whatever you need, I'm here. No questions, no judgments, just support. Standing there in the afternoon sunlight, I felt something unexpected bloom amid the chaos of my dismantled life. A network of support forming around me, people stepping forward to offer their strength, their expertise, their simple presence. For years, Jason had carefully isolated me, ensuring that my primary connection remained to him, that my view of the world was filtered through his perspective. Now, with that filter shattered, I was rediscovering connections I'd thought lost forever and forming new ones based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Let's get coffee, Dale suggested, nodding toward a cafe across the street. Andrea, Bennett is formidable, but there are aspects of these cases she may not have mentioned yet. As we walked together, I felt a quiet determination replacing the uncertainty of recent days. The path ahead remained challenging, but I no longer faced it alone. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving Jason's legal team just enough time to construct their initial defense strategy, but not enough to fully investigate the extent of the evidence against him. Andrea explained this was deliberate. The accelerated timeline would force them to respond before they could construct an airtight narrative. In the interim, a strange calm settled over my life. I moved into a corporate apartment arranged by the prosecutor's office, a neutral space unburdened by memories or associations with Jason. The modern furnishings and sterile environment felt appropriate for this transitional period, this in-between existence where I was neither the wife I had been, nor yet fully the woman I would become. Each morning, I met with Andrea and her team, reviewing potential testimony, examining documents, preparing for the aggressive cross-examination Jason's attorneys would inevitably employ. Each afternoon, I worked with the forensic accountants, identifying accounts, explaining transactions, reconstructing the financial labyrinth Jason had created over years. He was meticulous, remarked Marcus, the lead forensic accountant, as we traced money through 7 different shell companies. But he made one critical mistake. What was that? I asked, studying the complex diagram he'd created. He assumed you weren't paying attention, Marcus replied simply. The best financial criminals compartmentalize completely. Turner kept using patterns, same number sequences, important dates, variations on family names. Once we identified those patterns through the accounts you knew about, finding the others became much easier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jason's conviction that I couldn't understand his world had led him to underestimate me in ways that would now prove fatal to his defense. What Jason and his legal team didn't know, what Andrea had strategically kept concealed, was that the investigation had expanded well beyond the original charges. Each financial thread we pulled revealed new connections, new co-conspirators, new fraudulent schemes spanning nearly a decade. We're building a RICO case, Andrea explained during one of our preparation sessions, referring to the powerful racketeering laws typically used against organized crime. The individual fraud charges are just the beginning. Meanwhile, Jason's public relations strategy became clear. Carefully placed stories began appearing in financial publications suggesting he was the victim of overreaching federal prosecutors and a vengeful estranged wife. His attorney released statements portraying the case as a simple misunderstanding about complex but legal tax strategies. Most painfully, mutual friends began reaching out with concerned messages that subtly questioned my judgment. This all seems so extreme, Rebecca, wrote Caroline, whose husband served on the Biogen board. I'm sure there's a way to resolve this without destroying Jason's life. Have you considered mediation? Andrea had warned me about this exact tactic, the attempt to leverage social pressure and emotional connections to undermine my resolve. I responded to each message politely but firmly, maintaining the necessary boundaries while revealing nothing. About the expanding case, the deception now ran in the opposite direction. While Jason's team believed they were fighting a limited case centered primarily on the offshore accounts, Andrea's team was building something far more comprehensive, gathering testimony from former colleagues who had witnessed Jason's fraudulent activities over years. Each day brought new evidence, new witnesses, new charges quietly being assembled like pieces of a complex puzzle. And through it all, I maintained my outward composure, calm, cooperative, revealing nothing about the true scope of what was coming. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, I woke before dawn, my mind surprisingly clear despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Today would be the first time I'd see Jason since his arrest, the first public confrontation between the man who had systematically dismantled my independence and the woman who had reclaimed it. Andrea had prepared me thoroughly for what to expect. Turner will appear confident, controlled, impeccably dressed, she'd explained. His attorneys will have coached him to project innocence and confusion, the successful businessman blindsided by overzealous prosecution. The federal courthouse downtown bustled with unusual activity when we arrived. Financial crimes rarely attracted much public attention, but the combination of Jason's prominence, the Biogen connection, and the dramatic circumstances of his arrest had turned the case into a media spectacle. "Keep your eyes forward," Daniel advised as we approached the entrance, where reporters clustered with microphones and cameras. No comments, no reactions. Inside, the security checkpoint created a buffer between us and the press. Andrea met us in a private conference room, her expression composed but determined. Turner's team filed motions this morning to suppress the evidence obtained at the lakehouse, claiming improper search procedures. "Will that work?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "No," she replied confidently. "We had proper warrants based on evidence that predated your involvement, but it signals their strategy. They'll challenge every procedural aspect rather than addressing the substance of the charges." She passed me a folder containing documents I hadn't seen before. "These just came in from the forensic team. We believe Turner maintains another set of accounts we haven't yet identified. There are transfers to numbered accounts that don't match any of our known destinations." I studied the transaction records, frowning slightly as I noted the dates and amounts. "These all occurred during our annual trips to Switzerland," I observed. 4 years in a row, same week in January. Andrea's eyes sharpened. "Tell me about these trips." "Banking conferences, ostensibly." Jason always scheduled meetings alone, saying they were technical discussions that wouldn't interest me. The pattern suddenly seemed obvious. He would disappear for full days, claiming to be in negotiations. "While setting up additional accounts?" Andrea finished. "Can you identify the specific banks he might have visited, locations he mentioned, contacts, anything?" I closed my eyes, visualizing our hotel in Geneva, the maps Jason had studied, the names mentioned in phone calls. There was someone named Richter he met with regularly, and he always visited a particular area near Paradeplatz in Zurich. Andrea exchanged glances with her assistant, who immediately left the room with these new details. "This is exactly why having you involved is crucial," she told me. "These connections wouldn't appear in any document trail." The revelation created a strange sensation, a mixture of validation that my observations mattered and distress at how thoroughly Jason had used our marriage as cover for his financial crimes. Even our vacations had been opportunities for fraud. At precisely 9:30, we entered courtroom 3B. The space was formal, imposing, with dark wood paneling and the seal of the federal judiciary displayed prominently behind the judge's bench. Security was heightened, with additional marshals positioned throughout the room. Jason and his legal team were already seated at the defense table, 3 attorneys in expensive suits flanking him protectively. He had been released on restricted bail despite Andrea's objections, though his passport had been confiscated and his movements limited to the city limits. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I expected anger, perhaps even hatred. Instead, I encountered something more disturbing: calculation. Even now, facing serious federal charges, Jason was assessing angles, looking for leverage, planning his next move. What he couldn't know was that every financial detail he'd hidden, every secret account he believed secure, was being systematically uncovered and documented. The trap was closing, not just around the crimes we already knew about, but around the much larger conspiracy that Andrea's team was methodically exposing. As the judge entered and called the court to order, I sat straight-backed and calm, revealing nothing of what I knew. The trap was set, and Jason, still believing himself the cleverest person in any room, was walking directly into it. The preliminary hearing proceeded much as Andrea had predicted. Jason's legal team, led by the formidable Eleanor Blackwell, argued forcefully for dismissal of the primary charges, citing procedural technicalities and questioning the validity of the warrant execution. Judge Harriman, a no-nonsense veteran of the federal bench with a reputation for impartiality, listened attentively but denied each motion with crisp efficiency. The evidence was obtained legally through properly executed warrants, he ruled, looking over his reading glasses at the defense table. The court finds sufficient cause to proceed with the charges as filed. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained my composure, focusing on Andrea's steady presence beside me rather than Jason's calculated stare from across the room. When the hearing concluded with the setting of a trial date 3 months out, I felt a momentary wave of disappointment. 3 more months of legal maneuvering before any real resolution. "This is actually good for us," Andrea murmured as we gathered our materials. "More time to build the RICO case and identify the remaining accounts." As we prepared to leave, Eleanor Blackwell approached, her expression professionally neutral. "Ms. Bennett, might we have a brief word in private? Perhaps with Mrs. Turner present?" Andrea nodded, and we followed Blackwell to a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Inside, Jason waited alone, the first time we'd been in proximity, without federal agents or attorneys between us since his arrest. "I'll give you 5 minutes," Andrea stated firmly, "but I advise my witness not to discuss any aspects of the case directly." Eleanor nodded and stepped out, leaving the 3 of us in a triangle of tension. Jason had lost weight since his arrest, I noticed, but had otherwise maintained his immaculate appearance. Bespoke suit, perfect haircut, the veneer of success still intact despite the circumstances. "Rebecca," he began, his voice carrying that familiar note of reasoned persuasion. "This situation has escalated beyond what anyone intended. There are better ways to resolve our differences than through criminal proceedings." "Really?" I replied, keeping my tone even. "What would you suggest?" His eyes flickered momentarily to Andrea before returning to me. "The divorce settlement I proposed initially was perhaps unnecessarily restrictive. I'm prepared to be significantly more generous if we can move forward in a more productive manner." The implied offer was clear: drop cooperation with the prosecution in exchange for financial consideration. Exactly as Andrea had predicted. "How generous?" I asked, ignoring Andrea's warning glance. Jason leaned forward slightly, encouraged by what he perceived as interest. "Full ownership of both properties, a substantially increased monthly allowance, perhaps even a portion of my Biogen shares, once this misunderstanding is resolved." "Interesting proposal," I said, studying him with new clarity. Even now, facing serious federal charges, he believed everything could be negotiated, that everyone had a price. "But I have a question." "Of course," he replied, the confident smile I knew so well playing at the corners of his mouth. He thought he was gaining ground. "When you were arranging for the RC solution with Henderson, I asked calmly. Did you specify how it should happen? Or did you leave the details to him? The color drained from Jason's face. For the first time since I'd known him, he appeared genuinely speechless. Andrea stiffened beside me, not having expected this direct approach. I don't know what he began, but I cut him off. 3. Removal contingency, Jason. Did you at least specify that it should look like an accident, or were you past caring about appearances by then? His expression hardened into something ugly and unfamiliar. The mask of civilized negotiation dropped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. You have no idea what you've done, he said, voice barely audible. No idea who you're really dealing with. I think I finally do, I replied, standing to signal the end of our conversation. And for the record, there isn't enough money in those Swiss accounts to buy my silence. His eyes widened fractionally, confirmation that my mention of the undiscovered Swiss accounts had hit the mark. This isn't over, he said, the threat implicit in his tone. No, I agreed, moving toward the door where Andrea waited. It's just beginning. The trial date loomed 3 months in the future, but the real battle unfolded in the intervening weeks through motions, counter-motions, and increasingly desperate attempts by Jason's legal team to suppress evidence. Each new filing revealed their growing awareness of just how comprehensive the case against him had become. 2 weeks after our confrontation in the courthouse, Andrea called me into her office, her expression more animated than I'd seen previously. We found the Swiss accounts, she announced without preamble. Your mention of Paradeplatz and Richter gave us the lead we needed. The Swiss authorities have frozen assets totaling over $22 million. The amount stunned me. Even knowing about Jason's fraud, I hadn't imagined the scale. 22 million? How did he accumulate so much without anyone noticing? Systematic embezzlement through the Biogen research subsidiaries, Andrea explained. He was siphoning funds from cancer research grants, among other sources. The SEC investigation has expanded to include misappropriation of research funds and investor fraud. The revelation added another layer of disgust to my already complicated feelings. Not just financial crimes, but theft from cancer research, AI. Disease that had claimed Jason's own father. The capacity for compartmentalization required was almost incomprehensible. There's more, Andrea continued, sliding a document across her desk. Henderson has agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. The name sent a chill through me. Henderson, the contact who had discussed the removal contingency with Jason. He's provided details about conversations with Turner regarding various solutions to potential problems, Andrea said carefully, including contingency plans involving you. I scanned the document, my hands steady despite the disturbing content. Henderson's statement detailed 3 meetings with Jason over the past year where they had discussed handling the wife situation, if necessary. The most recent, just weeks before Jason's arrest, had progressed to specific methods that would appear accidental. We've added conspiracy charges based on this testimony, Andrea explained. These are substantially more serious than the financial crimes alone. The walls of legal pressure were closing in around Jason from all sides. His carefully constructed empire of fraud was collapsing, each new revelation more damning than the last. The following day, Eleanor Blackwell requested another meeting, this time at her firm's luxurious offices overlooking the city. Andrea accompanied me, her presence both protection and strategic advantage. My client is prepared to consider a plea arrangement, Eleanor stated once we were seated in a conference room that probably cost more per square foot than most homes. Contingent on certain accommodations. Andrea's expression remained impassive. I'm listening. Mr. Turner will plead guilty to reduce charges of securities fraud and tax evasion. In exchange, the conspiracy charges would be dropped, and Mrs. Turner would receive a favorable divorce settlement including full ownership. of both properties and a substantial financial package. The offer hovered in the air between us. 6 months ago, I might have considered it a victory, financial security, ownership of the homes I loved, freedom from a marriage that had become a cage. Now, understanding the full scope of Jason's crimes and intentions, it felt insultingly inadequate. Andrea looked to me, silently asking for my input before responding. I met her gaze steadily and gave a slight shake of my head. "The offer is declined," Andrea stated formally. "Given the evidence we've accumulated, including Mr. Henderson's cooperation, we will be proceeding with all charges as filed." Eleanor's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing genuine surprise. She had clearly expected the financial incentives to be persuasive, had counted on my prioritizing material security over justice. Another miscalculation in a case increasingly defined by them. 3 days later, the final piece fell into place. Megan, facing significant charges herself and abandoned by the legal support Jason had initially arranged, reached out through her newly appointed public defender to offer complete cooperation. "She's prepared to testify regarding Turner's statements about eliminating you as an obstacle," Andrea informed me during our daily briefing. With both Henderson and Morgan corroborating these conversations, the conspiracy charges are now virtually unassailable. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harriman entered, his expression solemn as he took his seat at the bench. 10 months had passed since Jason's arrest. 10 months of legal maneuvering, evidence gathering, and preparation for a trial that would now not take place. After exhausting every possible defense strategy, Jason had finally accepted the inevitable and agreed to a plea deal just days before jury selection was set to begin. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, dressed in a simple navy suit that projected quiet confidence rather than the victim status Jason's team had tried to establish in pretrial motions. Daniel sat beside me, a steady presence throughout this long journey. On my other side was Diane Matthews, our rekindled friendship now stronger than before Jason's interference. Andrea had explained what to expect during this hearing: the formal acknowledgement of the plea agreement, Jason's required admission of guilt to specific charges, the judge's acceptance or rejection of the terms. What she couldn't prepare me for was the emotional complexity of seeing the final collapse of the man who had shaped so much of my adult life. Jason entered with his attorneys, his appearance noticeably different from the confident executive who had dismissed me from our lakehouse a year earlier. Though still meticulously dressed, he had lost weight, and the strain of the past months showed in the new lines around his eyes, the slight stoop of his shoulders. Power and control had been the defining characteristics of his personality. Their absence had physically transformed him. When our eyes met briefly across the courtroom, I felt none of the vindictive satisfaction I might once have expected. Instead, there was a strange, calm clarity, recognition of a chapter closing, of justice being served not through vengeance, but through the simple power of truth revealed. Judge Harriman called the court to order, and the proceedings began with the reading of the charges to which Jason had agreed to plead guilty. Securities, fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, the lesser but still significant charge of conspiracy to commit bodily harm, reduced from the original attempted murder conspiracy charge as part of the plea agreement. "The defendant will now state his plea," Judge Harriman instructed, looking directly at Jason. Jason stood, flanked by his attorneys. "Guilty, Your Honor," he stated, his voice steady but subdued. "And does the defendant understand that by entering this plea, he waives his right to a trial by jury?" "Yes, Your Honor." The formalities continued, detailed questions ensuring Jason understood the consequences of his plea, the rights he was waiving, the sentences he faced. Throughout, he maintained composure, answering clearly and directly, occasionally conferring quietly with Eleanor Blackwell at his side. Then came the part Andrea had prepared me for, the factual basis for the plea, where Jason would need to acknowledge specific actions that constituted the crimes charged. "Mr. Turner," the judge began, "please describe in your own words the actions you took regarding the offshore accounts established between 2018 and 2022. For the next 20 minutes, Jason methodically outlined the financial schemes he had constructed, the systematic embezzlement from Biogen's research subsidiaries, the web of shell companies designed to hide transactions, the tax evasion strategies spanning multiple jurisdictions. His delivery was precise, almost clinical, as if describing actions taken by someone else. Only when addressing the conspiracy charge involving me did his composure falter slightly. "And did you have conversations with Michael Henderson regarding potential harm to Rebecca Turner?" Judge Harriman asked directly. Jason paused, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. "Yes, Your Honor, I discussed contingency plans in the event she discovered certain financial arrangements before they could be secured. Contingency plans that included potential physical harm?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, Your Honor." Something shifted in that moment, not just for me, but palpably throughout the courtroom. The abstract financial crimes, serious as they were, existed primarily in the realm of numbers and legal violations. This admission brought the human impact into stark relief. The man standing before the court had not only committed fraud, but had contemplated violence against his partner of 22 years when she became inconvenient to his plans. When Judge Harriman announced he was accepting the plea agreement and would proceed to sentencing in 30 days, I felt an unexpected sense of completion rather than triumph. This formal acknowledgement of guilt, spoken in Jason's own voice, provided a closure that no amount of financial settlement or property division could have achieved. Outside the courthouse, standing in the clear autumn sunlight, I realized how profoundly I had changed through this ordeal. The woman who had once deferred to Jason's judgment in all things, who had gradually surrendered her professional identity and independence to maintain marital harmony, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer in her boundaries, unwilling to compromise her integrity for approval or security. 1 year to the day after Jason's sentencing hearing, I stood on the deck of the lakehouse, watching the spring sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The property had been officially transferred to my sole ownership 6 months earlier, after the courts finalized the asset distribution following Jason's conviction. He was serving an 11-year sentence in a federal prison, the once powerful executive now confined to a cell and strict daily routine. Megan had received a suspended sentence in exchange for her complete cooperation, though the professional consequences of her involvement had effectively ended her career in financial services. The lakehouse itself had transformed under my direction. What had once been Jason's wood-paneled office, the space where he had plotted financial crimes and contingency plans, was now a bright, open studio where I had reconnected with my architectural design work. The master bedroom suite had been completely renovated, erasing the memories of betrayal with fresh colors and sustainable materials that reflected my own aesthetic, rather than Jason's preference for ostentatious luxury. "It looks beautiful," Diane commented, joining me on the deck with 2 glasses of wine. "You've reclaimed this space completely." "Not just reclaimed," I corrected, accepting the glass. "Reimagined. This gathering, friends and family assembled to celebrate both the lakehouse's transformation and my own, represented the new foundation I'd built over the past year. Daniel was there with his wife, Sarah, Dale Jenkins from across the cove, whose friendship and guidance had proven invaluable throughout the legal proceedings. Andrea Bennett had even accepted my invitation, our professional relationship having evolved into mutual respect and tentative friendship. Most significantly, the gathering included 3 women who had contacted me after Jason's conviction, former colleagues from pharmaceutical companies who had experienced his manipulation and fraud firsthand, but had previously felt powerless to challenge him. Our shared experiences had formed the basis for a support network that had expanded beyond our immediate circumstances. Everyone's here, Daniel announced, emerging from inside. Should we make it official? I nodded, feeling a surge of pride and purpose as I turned to address the assembled group. Thank you all for coming today. What began as a personal journey to reclaim my life has evolved into something much more significant than I could have imagined. The previous 6 months had been dedicated not just to rebuilding my own life, but to creating something meaningful from the painful experience. Working with Andrea and a team of attorneys specializing in financial fraud, I had established the Lakehouse Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of financial exploitation and providing resources for those seeking to rebuild after economic abuse. Today marks the official launch of the Lakehouse Foundation, I continued, gesturing toward the newly renovated boathouse that now served as the organization's headquarters. Using funds recovered from the fraud case, we'll provide legal assistance, financial literacy education, and recovery resources for those who have experienced similar situations. Dale raised his glass in a toast to turning tragedy into purpose. As conversations flowed around me, I found myself drawn once again to the lake's edge, to the water that had witnessed both my darkest moments and my emergence from them. The reflection looking back at me was clear-eyed, uncompromised. A woman who had discovered strength not despite betrayal, but through confronting it with integrity and resilience. Jason had believed I would crumble without him, that my identity was so entwined with his that I couldn't function independently. That assumption, like so many he had made, had proven catastrophically wrong. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the property that was now truly mine in every sense. Tomorrow, the foundation would welcome its first clients, people beginning their own journeys from victimhood to empowerment. I would share with them not just practical resources, but the most valuable lesson I had learned. That sometimes losing what you thought you needed reveals what you truly are. Rebecca, Daniel called from the deck. They're ready for your presentation on the Foundation's first initiatives. I took a final moment alone at the water's edge, acknowledging both how far I had come and the ongoing nature of healing and growth. The path forward wasn't perfect or entirely certain, but it was authentically mine. Each step determined by my own choices rather than someone else's manipulation. Turning back toward the lake house, my home, reclaimed and reimagined, I walked with confident steps toward the future I was now building on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.